Somewhere along the slow and silent unraveling of your former life, perhaps after a shattering insight or a collapse that felt more like death than revelation, something within you shifted irrevocably. You glimpsed through the veil. The masks fell. The machinery of identity, ambition, and social striving was exposed as hollow repetition. For a brief moment, this clarity felt like liberation. You stood outside the world's hypnotic rhythm and saw it for what it was, a dance of illusions. But then, almost imperceptibly, the radiance of that awakening faded. Not with noise, but with a dimming so subtle you barely noticed it happening. What once thrilled you began to feel distant, drained of significance. Life did not scream at you anymore, it whispered, nothing at all. You were no longer chasing, but neither were you arriving. You stopped seeking, but you also stopped feeling. Not in the dramatic sense of despair, but in the grey silence of meaning slipping through your fingers. The question began to echo within. Why does this newfound clarity feel so hollow? Why does truth feel so numb? This is the hidden paradox few speak of. We are told that spiritual awakening will ignite our spirit, unleash our joy, illuminate our path. But for many, especially the sensitive, the introspective, the ones whose souls have always ached for something deeper, it brings a strange kind of emptiness. Not peace, but disorientation. Not passion, but detachment. I once spoke to a woman deeply immersed in inner work, someone who devoured the teachings of the sages and mystics of our time. Her shelves overflowed with the words of those who whispered of transcendence and ego death. One day, after a profound inner collapse, she awoke to what she described as a stunning absence. She saw through the scaffolding of ego, ambition, identity, and cultural performance. She understood. And yet, 2 months later, I found her listless, beneath the quiet glow of her ceiling lamp, unable to move, speak, or care. She said to me, "I used to cry because I wasn't doing enough. Now, I don't even care whether I do anything at all. I thought enlightenment would feel like fire, but it feels like fog." What she touched was not failure, but the aftermath of disillusionment, a psychic death, the death of the false self. And like all deaths, it demands mourning before resurrection. In Jungian psychology, this is not the end of the path, but the beginning of a deeper journey. One where meaning must be reborn, not from outer pursuit, but from the dark womb of the soul itself. Carl Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, foresaw the silent collapse that follows awakening. He did not dress it in mysticism or fashionable slogans, but he named its essence with unsettling precision. When the unconscious erupts into the light of awareness, it does not merely enlighten, it dismantles. Jung wrote, "Enlightenment does not come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." At first glance, this sounds poetic, but in lived experience it is nothing short of apocalyptic. To awaken is not to soar, but to watch the scaffolding of your identity fall inwards. The stories you told yourself, the ambitions that gave you direction, the relational roles that defined your worth, even the rhythm of your days, all begin to dissolve. And what remains is not clarity, but void. Yet the ego, that fragile vessel once charged with navigating the world, does not disappear. It stumbles. It searches for a map that no longer exists. Jung would insist that what you are facing is not laziness nor clinical despair, but a psychic liminality. You are no longer who you were, and not yet who you are becoming. This is the sacred middle, the space between narratives. And because our culture fears stillness, it has no language for this in-between. We call it being stuck. We diagnose it. We try to rush through it. But Jung saw it as necessary, a descent into the underworld of the soul, where the old gods die and new symbols begin to stir. In this twilight of selfhood, motivation seems to vanish. But perhaps it is not that you have no motivation. It is that the motivations you once obeyed have been unmasked as hollow. The drive to prove, to accumulate, to perform, to succeed. They belong to the identity that is now disintegrating. What you feel is not failure, it is a sacred inertia, a sacred pause. You are not asleep, you are being emptied. And this emptiness, though terrifying, is fertile. Jung warned that if this stage is bypassed, the self remains fragmented and the transformation incomplete. But if you stay, if you breathe into this psychological death, a deeper vitality begins to awaken. Not the frantic hunger of the ego, but the quiet pull of the soul. This is not depression, it is initiation. Not a breakdown, but a sacred undoing. You are being prepared for the second birth, the moment when life will no longer be lived from the outside in, but from the inside out. The world has not abandoned you, it is waiting. Waiting for you to emerge, not as the person you thought you had to be, but as the one you truly are. And that emergence, though slow and often silent, is the beginning of everything. If you find yourself adrift in a strange quiet after awakening, unsure why the fire that once moved you has dimmed, you are not broken. You are undergoing a psychic transition so profound it defies common language. It is not a failure of will. It is the soul retreating from an identity that no longer serves its truth. What once energized you, ambition, productivity, recognition, now feels hollow, irrelevant, even foreign. The lists, the goals, the striving that once filled your calendar now lie untouched. Not because you are lazy, but because the engine that drove them has shut down. Carl Jung foresaw this strange and sacred void long before modern culture gave it a hashtag. He understood that the self, when awakening to its deeper layers, begins to shed what he called the persona, the mask the ego wears to belong, to be approved of, to survive the social world. This mask is not evil, it is necessary for early development. But when the mask becomes too tight, the psyche revolts. And what emerges is a disorientation that feels like disinterest, like apathy, but is in truth a calling to authenticity. You have not lost your motivation, you have outgrown its source. The version of you that once needed validation, applause, and titles has begun to dissolve. The ego, having carried you thus far, now falters, unsure how to act without the script it rehearsed for decades. You feel as if you have stepped off stage in the middle of the play, dropped the costume, and forgotten your lines. The crowd still watches, but you no longer care to perform. This liminal space, what Jung might call the sacred threshold between identities, is not a detour. It is the path. You are standing in the hallway between the death of the constructed self and the birth of something raw, real, and unknown. In this space, confusion is a sign of growth. Emptiness is not a void, but a womb. You are not unmotivated, you are being rewired, and until your new self finds its rhythm, the old melodies will feel false. Jung warned that if we cling to the old when the soul calls us forward, we create neurosis. But if we can honor the silence, the stillness, the seeming lack of direction, we enter into a deeper covenant with life itself. You are not stuck, you are becoming. And the longer you can remain present in this sacred space of unknowing, the more fully your next self will be born. Not as a reconstruction of the old, but as a revelation of the truth. Carl Jung taught that we are not born to serve the ego, but to integrate it into a larger psychic whole. The aim is not the perfection of the persona, but the realization of the self, a deeper center of being that contains both conscious and unconscious elements, and that reflects the totality of who we are. This process, which Jung named individuation, is not a linear ascent, but a metamorphosis. And like all transformations in nature, it involves death. Not literal death, but the death of identifications, attachments, and illusions. The old ego, once driven by the need for status, praise, and validation, no longer holds the same authority. It begins to dissolve, not with drama, but with quiet resistance. You find yourself unable to engage with what once defined your life, the job, the goals, the relationships that once gave you a sense of self. They no longer feel real because the self they served is no longer leading your inner life. Jung warned that, after awakening, many become stranded in what appears to be spiritual detachment, but is often spiritual avoidance. This is the danger of stopping halfway. You realize the illusions of the world, and in doing so, you risk withdrawing entirely, mistaking disconnection for enlightenment. This is the trap of spiritual bypassing, where the soul cries out for embodiment, but the ego insists on floating above life, untouched, unbothered. But the self seeks incarnation, not escape. It wants to bring wholeness into form, into flesh, into the ordinary rhythms of a human life. And to do that, one must pass through a strange and sacred phase that few recognize while they are in it. It is what Jung might describe through the ancient principle of enantiodromia, the reversal of energy that arises when a force has been pushed to its extreme. When you have lived in performance and striving for too long, the soul pulls in the opposite direction. It draws you into silence, stillness, dissolution. This is not regression. It is a cocoon. Like the caterpillar that liquefies into an unrecognizable goo before forming wings, your psyche enters a period of suspension. You are not what you were, and not yet what you will become. You sit in silence while the world rushes by. You feel the absence of clarity, the absence of ambition, and you fear something is wrong. But Jung would say, this is a rite of passage. In our world of metrics and movement, this inner pause is mistaken for failure. You label yourself lazy, disconnected, broken, but in truth, you are being remade, and judgment of this stage is precisely what blocks the energy that is trying to return. Trust the stillness. Honor the not knowing. The self has not abandoned you. It is preparing to emerge through you, in a form you cannot yet see. Carl Jung observed that the psyche, when pushed to extremes, does not collapse into ruin, but initiates a movement of reversal, a sacred rebalancing he called enantiodromia. It is not a breakdown, but a return to center through paradox. In the aftermath of awakening, this manifests as a dramatic inner shift, where once you were driven by the ceaseless voice of the ego, the voice that demanded you strive, achieve, and prove, you now find yourself pulled towards stillness. The pendulum has swung, not arbitrarily, but in accordance with a deeper rhythm within the soul. From "I must do everything" to "why do anything at all?" This turning is not regression, but sacred recalibration. And yet, to the untrained ego, it feels like death. It feels like a dissolution into formlessness, like the caterpillar turning to primordial liquid within the cocoon, no longer a creature, but not yet a butterfly. A psychological goo that cannot act, cannot produce, cannot identify itself. But it is precisely here, Jung would say, where the most essential transformation begins. This is the hermit phase, echoed in myths and dreams, the symbolic descent into the underworld, where one's old motivations dissolve and nothing external can provide direction. The ego trembles in this silence, hungry for clarity and productivity. It wants purpose wrapped in certainty. But the self, the greater organizing center of the psyche, speaks in a different voice. It does not shout. It does not rush. It whispers, "Let go. I am building something deeper than what you thought you needed." Modern spiritual culture often bypasses this sacred stage. It offers the comfort of cliches like "follow your joy" or "stay high vibe," as if light alone can heal what lives in the shadow. But Jung would warn that the soul does not evolve by clinging to one polarity. It grows by holding opposites, by descending into what we have feared and repressed. The stillness you find yourself in, the loss of ambition, the disinterest in old goals, is not apathy. It is the psyche metabolizing what could not be faced while you were busy chasing. It is the darkness inviting you to integrate what was once split off. And then, quietly, something begins to shift. When you stop fighting the void, when you stop demanding instant clarity, a new kind of motivation emerges. It is not driven by external validation or internal panic. It is not the adrenaline of performance or the anxiety of falling behind. It is something older, quieter, more trustworthy. It moves through you like memory, like knowing without explanation. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as an abstract idea, but as a living compass within. You begin to act not because you are told to, but because something within you recognizes the right moment to move. This is not a hustle, it is harmony. Not the frantic striving of the fragmented ego, but the calm directive of the integrated soul. And that is where the true journey begins. So, you have passed through the threshold. You have endured the silence of the void, the disorientation of stillness, the psychic unraveling that so often follows true awakening. And now something subtler is emerging from the ashes. Not urgency, not ambition, but an inner beckoning, almost imperceptible at first. A quiet resonance, a soft pull that does not demand, but invites. This is the voice of the self, no longer muffled by the ego's noise, speaking not through command, but through symbolic feeling, intuition, and image. Carl Jung called this transition the beginning of the symbolic life. It is not about grand visions or cosmic drama, but a reorientation of the soul to meaning. To live symbolically is to see your life not as a sequence of tasks or achievements, but as an unfolding dialogue with the unconscious. It is to recognize your dreams, impulses, synchronicities, and subtle inner nudges as sacred messages from a deeper intelligence that seeks not your performance, but your participation. When the ego finally relinquishes its rigid grip, when it stops demanding clarity and control, a different kind of motivation arises. You no longer live by the checklist of who you were told to be. You begin to move by what feels true, not just logical. You notice yourself creating, not for applause, but from a mysterious joy that rises when you are aligned. You decline invitations that violate your integrity, even when they promise reward. You are no longer chasing a flame outside of yourself. You are tending to one within. Jung reminded us that the self is not a theory, but a presence that manifests as a sense of deep resonance, of rightness, often without explanation. And it leads you not away from life but into it, more fully, more consciously. This does not mean you will never again feel doubt or fatigue. You will. It does not promise that grief, confusion, or uncertainty will vanish. They are part of the human path. But what changes is your relationship to them. They no longer signify failure. They are seen as seasons of the soul. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the absence of self-betrayal. You are no longer dragging your body through obligations shaped by an outdated identity. You are listening, you are attuning, you are becoming. To live this way is to abandon the race without abandoning growth. It is to pursue not status, but truth. Not applause, but presence. And strangely, paradoxically, this is what brings about the most meaningful impact. It is not born of compulsion, it is born of coherence. Your life begins to align not because you forced it to, but because you stopped resisting what you truly are. The self does not push, it pulses. It draws you toward what nourishes the whole of you, and when you follow that, you find yourself teaching, building, healing, loving. Not because you are trying to become someone, but because you are finally being who you are. So if you feel that your old fire has gone out, know this: it was not your light that failed. It was the fuel that was never yours to burn. What rises now is slower, steadier, sacred. It is not the end of your awakening. It is the beginning of your embodiment. Jung did not promise ease, but he did promise depth. And if you have made it here, you are already living a deeper story. The world does not need you to be motivated by fear. It needs you to be lit by meaning. That is how the self moves, quietly, symbolically, in truth. Let it lead, let it speak, and you will become what you are always meant to be. If this message stirred something inside you, don't stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into the journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery. It might just be the breakthrough your soul has been waiting for. Tap into it now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community committed to truth, transformation, and real inner change. You're not alone on this path. I'll meet you in the next video, where we continue becoming who we were always meant to be.